Long before the warden lurked in the deep dark, Minecraft's strongholds held quieter, stranger secrets. Few remember the original whispering walls, a rare glitch where, if you pressed your ear against certain stone bricks in just the right corner of a library, you could sometimes hear the faintest echo of a zombie groan or a distant lava bubble. Players swore it was intentional, a hidden detail meant to make the ruins feel alive. For years, explorers mapped which strongholds had talking stones, trading seed numbers like treasure maps. Then an update fixed the bug, and the walls fell silent forever. Some say if you find an untouched 1.7 world and sit very still in the blackness, you can still hear the last whispers fading away. Before phantom membranes dropped from the skies, there was a stranger ghost in the machine. In early beta, furnace minicarts would occasionally vanish from powered rails, leaving behind only their faint chugging sound. Players would follow the phantom noise for chunks only for it to stop abruptly. The vanished carts were never in the entity list, couldn't be F3, found yet their echoes persisted until relogging. Some claimed they'd seen the ghost trains moving on invisible tracks at world edges. Others insisted it was just audio lag. But on quiet multiplayer servers, when all other sounds slept, veterans would still pause near abandoned rail lines. Listening. Deep in the code of versions past, there existed a particle effect known only as iconcrack_19, and like its colorful siblings, it had no assigned item, just a faint purple shimmer that would very rarely appear when breaking blocks. Data miners found references to it being tied to item.I in early test builds, leading to theories of abandoned ender-related mechanics. For one glorious snapshot, someone at Mohang accidentally hooked it to Chorus Fruit teleportation, a shower of violet sparks that made the end feel magical. But by the next update, it was gone again, leaving only a generation of texture pack makers trying to recreate that specific shade of forgotten purple. Redstone engineers still argue about the true nature of the early daylight sensor's output. While it now gives clean analog signals, its first iterations emitted a strange pulse ripple, tiny fluctuations in power that didn't match the sun's position. Clever builders discovered these anomalies could be amplified to create sundial clocks that tracked not just day, night cycles, but moon phases and even rare eclipse. Like events, the effect was so subtle most players never noticed, and so inconsistent that tutorials never taught it. When Mohang standardized the sensor's behavior, they unknowingly erased one of Minecraft's most delicate hidden rhythms, a secret song of light and shadow that only the most patient redstoners ever learned to hear. Buried in pre-1.16 code strings. References to biome_nether_crust suggest the nether was meant to have a fourth original biome. Unlike the hellish wastes, cells and valleys, or warped forests, this one allegedly featured sulfur pits and basalt pillars, terrain that later appeared fragmented across other biomes. The most intriguing clue, a single unused sound file named ambient.nether.crust.rumble that plays a low, tectonic shifting noise when hacked into the game. Some speculate it was cut for being too similar to the overworld's caves, while others believe it became the basis for the deep dark's vibration mechanics. Either way, the nether feels inexplicably incomplete to those who know there should have been a fourth hell. Before the pillager update, there existed a rare bug where a villager would occasionally spawn with a nitwit skin but the profession of librarian. These glitched sages couldn't trade, yet their hovering emerald particles swirled differently, almost forming shapes. Players reported seeing fleeting symbols in the particle clouds, a creeper face, another portal, even what looked like a seed number. The most persistent claim that standing near them during thunderstorms increased the phenomenon. Mohang patched it out as a rendering error, but not before someone allegedly decoded a working seed from the particles, a seed that supposedly led to a stronghold with every end portal frame already activated. The last known Oracle villager disappeared from a private server in 2017. Along with the player who discovered it, everyone knows the far lands, that glitchy world edge where terrain generation breaks down into fractal madness. But few remember its acoustic twin, the sound border, at exactly 1 5 times the far land's distance, audio would begin to distort. Mobs sounded underwater, footsteps played backwards, and most eerily players reported hearing phantom chunk loading noises from directions where no chunks existed. The effect was so subtle most never noticed until they turned around to leave and heard their own movements replaying from the void behind them. Modern versions eliminated this along with the far lands, leaving only unanswered questions. Was it a buffer overflow? Or was the game trying to generate sound for non-existent blocks? The truth is lost to updates past ... For 3 snapshots in 1.4. There existed a painting titled void.png, just for pixels of transparency that rendered as a blank canvas. When placed, it had a 1/1000th chance of showing its true form for a single frame. An eerie grayscale face some claimed resembled Notch's early avatar. The image was so fleeting most assumed they'd imagined it, and the file was scrubbed from later releases. But texture pack makers noticed something odd. The original painting.png still reserved space for it, with its dimensions matching the mysterious Nether Reactor sprite from Pocket Edition. Was it a placeholder, an inside joke, or a ghost in the texture atlas, watching from between the pixels? Before the daylight cycle was fully standardized, furnaces burned fuel at slightly inconsistent rates during full moons. This wasn't in any patch notes, just an emergent quirk of the celestial angle calculation affecting tick speed. Obsessive players built lunar chronometers using furnace arrays that would only align properly every 8 Minecraft weeks. The most elaborate designs incorporated minecart loops that would complete circuits in perfect sync with these rare events, powering hidden doors or triggering redstone symphonies. When Mohan optimized the furnace code in 1.5, they unwittingly severed Minecraft's last mechanical link to its forgotten moon physics. Leaving only dusty schematics on old forum posts as proof these celestial clocks ever existed. Early aquatic snapshots contained an unused music disc called submerged.og, 3 minutes of slowed down, waterlogged notes that would allegedly play in ruins when no player was nearby. Data miners found it was meant to trigger during thunderstorms, with the drowned humming fragments of its melody. The track was cut for being too atmospheric red, terrifying, but remnants linger in the sound files. If you slow a Trident's throw sound by 800%, you can hear the ghost of its chorus. Some say this explains why drowns still turn toward players silently, as if waiting for someone to remember the song they were meant to sing. In the days before shulker boxes, there existed a rare world generation bug where 2 chests would spawn occupying the same block space. These phantom doubles showed merged inventories. Items placed in one side might appear in the other, or vanish entirely. The most coveted were mirror chests that seemed to share contents across distances, with players reporting finding the same items in dungeon chests thousands of blocks apart. Mohan patched it as a serious duplication glitch, but old-timers still whisper about the legendary infinity chest that allegedly connected every stronghold library in a single world. Before end cities. Before Purpur, there was the original end portalist structure that generated floating over the void in early beta versions. Unlike the later stronghold portals, this one had no frame, just a swirling plane of static that teleported players to a second, identical end dimension. The only difference, this one had bedrock floors. And the dragon didn't spawn. Some claim this was the prototype for creative mode's end. Others say it was a scrapped and overworld concept. All that remains is a generation value in old world files and type equals 0, and the unshakable feeling that our current end is just the second draft of something much, much older. Between beta 1.2 and 1.4. Placing wool blocks in specific patterns always involving light blue and black could cause adjacent redstone to behave erratically. This wasn't documented, just an emergent property of how those block IDs interacted with signal calculations. Clever builders created wool gates that performed logic operations no normal circuit could replicate. The most elaborate could even store binary data in checkerboard patterns. When block IDs were reorganized for 1.5, the effect vanished overnight. taking with it an entire branch of undocumented computational magic. Today, only a handful of abandoned memory servers remain as proof that Minecraft once had a secret programming language woven into its very fabric. Before glowstone became the Nether's primary light source. There were ember blocks, cracked netherrack that emitted a faint, pulsating glow. Removed for causing frame rate issues, they left behind two legacies. The netherrack ambient particle effect, which still sometimes appears near lava, and an odd quirk where placing soul torches on certain netherrack formations makes their flames burn slightly bluer. Texture artists insist this color number for A7A9F. To be exact, matches no other light source in the game, a chromatic ghost of the Nether's first forgotten illumination. SUPRFLAT single quotes S void preset hides an eerie anomaly. If you dig down to the bedrock layer and place a note block, it plays a distorted version of the normal note stretched just 12% longer, with a faint echo. This only happens in void worlds, and only at exact y=0. Dataminers found this is because void worlds use a different sound reverb calculation, one that's otherwise only applied ... in the end. Some believe this proves the superflat void was originally meant to be a pocket dimension, not just empty space. Others note that if you build a 3-block-high pillar at world center and play the note block sequence from the credits, the echoes align perfectly with the main menu music's rhythm. Coincidence? Or is the void world humming along to a song we've forgotten how to hear ... Deep beneath the surface of Minecraft's early worlds, where the air grows thick with the scent of damp wood and rusted rails, there existed a phenomenon few remember: the whispering mineshafts. These sprawling underground labyrinths, with their splintered planks and cobwebbed corridors, were once said to carry voices. Not the groans of zombies or the skittering of spiders, but faint, indecipherable murmurs that seemed to seep from the very wood itself. Players who ventured into these tunnels with their sound turned up would sometimes pause, certain they had heard something: a syllable, a sigh, a distant conversation just beyond the edge of perception. Some claimed it was the remnants of long-dead miners, their voices trapped in the timber like echoes in a canyon. Others believed it was a glitch, an accidental looping of ambient cave noises that the developers had never intended. The truth was never uncovered. With the updates that refined world generation, the whispers faded. The mineshafts grew quieter, their wooden beams no longer humming with unseen voices. Yet to this day, if you find an untouched world from those early versions, stand very still in the deepest part of an abandoned mineshaft and listen, really listen, you might just catch the last dying breath of a sound that was never meant to be heard. The Mesa biome, with its towering copper cliffs and sprawling red deserts, was always a place of quiet beauty. But in the earliest days of its introduction, players began reporting something unusual. A herd of horses, their coats a shimmering gold, would appear at dawn on the highest plateaus, galloping in perfect formation before vanishing into the sunrise. These were no ordinary horses. They left no hoofprints, they made no sound, and if a player dared to approach, the herd would dissolve into the morning mist like a mirage. Some claimed they were a glitch, a remnant of unused mob behavior, a placeholder texture that had never been fully removed. Others swore they were intentional, a poetic touch meant to evoke the spirit of wild mustangs roaming an untamed land. The most persistent rumor, though, was that these golden horses were tied to an unfinished feature, a lost treasure buried somewhere in the mesa, waiting for a rider brave enough to chase the phantom herd to its secret destination. But before anyone could solve the mystery, an update adjusted the biome's spawning mechanics, and the golden horses never appeared again. To this day, Mesa explorers keep their eyes on the horizon at dawn, hoping to catch a glimpse of the ghostly herd that once ran where no horse should have been able to go. In the frozen wastes of the Ice Plains biome, where the wind howls like a wounded wolf and the snow falls in eternal silence, there was once a village, not a normal village, with its bustling farmers and chattering iron golems, but a village frozen in time. Players who stumbled upon it describe the same eerie scene: houses half buried in snow, their doors creaking in the wind, lanterns still glowing, though no villager had ever lit them. farms perfectly preserved beneath layers of ice, their crops suspended in an eternal harvest. And at the center of it all, a well so deep that dropping a snowball into it yielded no sound of impact, the strangest part. No villagers, not a single one, just empty beds, untouched workstations, and the lingering sense that something had gone terribly wrong here. Some believed it was a glitch of village that had generated without its inhabitants. Others theorized it was an intentional mystery, a ghost town meant to tell a story without words. But the most unsettling theory of all was that the villagers had been there once. And something had taken them. When the update that revamped village mechanics arrived, the frozen village disappeared entirely from world generation. Now, it exists only in the memories of those few players who wandered into its silent streets and felt the weight of its emptiness. Long before glowstone illuminated the Nether's cavernous ceilings, before soul fire cast its eerie blue glow, there was another light source, one that was lost to time. Deep in the Nether's earliest versions, players reported stumbling upon patches of a strange, luminous fungus. Unlike the warped and crimson fungi of today, this variety pulsed with a soft, golden light, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. Breaking it yielded no drops, just a faint, lingering sparkle in the air before the light winked out forever. The most curious detail? This fungus only grew in one specific circumstance near nether portals that had been left inactive for weeks of real-world time. As if the nether itself was reaching through the dormant gate, testing the waters of the overworld with delicate, glowing tendrils. When the nether update arrived, the golden fungus vanished entirely. No patch notes mentioned it, no textures remained in the files. It was as if it had never existed at all. Yet veteran nether explorers still swear by an old habit: they never leave their portals unattended for too long. Just in case something starts growing in the dark, before the drowned became the groaning, trident-wielding menaces we know today. They had a different behavior, one far more haunting. In the earliest snapshots of the aquatic update, drowned that spawned in ocean ruins would occasionally stop their aimless wandering. They would turn their faces upward, toward the distant sun, and begin to hum, not the garbled, watery groans of their modern counterparts, but an actual melodious, slow, mournful tune that carried through the water like a whale's song. Players who heard it described the same sensation: a chill, a pause, the inexplicable urge to stop and listen. The song lasted only a few seconds before the drowned returned to their usual behavior. There was no gameplay reason for it. No achievement, no trigger, just a fleeting moment of beauty in the depths. Then, without explanation, it was removed. The drowned's humming was silenced, replaced by the gurgling growls we know today. But some say that if you find an untouched ocean ruin far from spawn and wait there at dawn with your volume turned up, you might still hear the last echoes of the drowned's lost song. Super flat worlds were meant to be simple, endless plains with no terrain variation, no surprises. But in the earliest versions of this super flat preset, there was an anomaly. If a player dug down beneath the bedrock layer using glitches or commands to bypass the world's bottom, they didn't fall into the void immediately. Instead, they entered a state the community called the silent zone. Here, all sound ceased. No footsteps, no block placements, no music. Just absolute, crushing quiet. But the strangest part: if you stayed there long enough, your screen would begin to darken, not like blindness or night vision, but as if the world itself was losing color. And then, just before the void claimed you, a single line of text would appear in the chat. You weren't supposed to see this. No command could replicate it. No debug screen explained it. And when Mohang later patched the ability to bypass bedrock in super flat worlds, the silent zone vanished forever. Was it an Easter egg, a developer's private joke, or something else entirely? We may never know. In the days before hoppers and shulker boxes, there existed a rare but infamous glitch: the phantom double chest. Sometimes, when two chests generated adjacent to each other in dungeons or villages, their inventories would become linked. Items placed in one would appear in the other, no matter how far apart they were. Players who discovered these linked chests quickly realized the potential instant item transport across thousands of blocks. No redstone required. Some even claimed to have found triple chests, quad chests, entire networks of storage that defied the laws of the game's physics. But the glitch had a darker side. Just as often as items would duplicate across linked chests, they would vanish entirely, swallowed by some unseen void between the two containers. Mohan patched the bug in beta 1.6, calling it a serious inventory corruption issue. But old-timers still whisper about the legendary Infinity Chest, a double chest that allegedly linked every stronghold library in a single world that no one ever proved its existence. But no one ever disproved it either. For a single snapshot in early 2013, there existed a painting titled void.png. Unlike the other paintings, which displayed pixel art or landscapes, this one was blank, just an empty frame. Most players assumed it was a placeholder, an unfinished asset that would be filled in later. But a handful of players reported something strange. When placed in complete darkness, the void painting had a 1 in 1,000 chance of flickering. For a single frame, it would display an image of face, some said, a pair of eyes, a figure standing just out of sight. Then it would return to blankness, as if nothing had happened. The next update removed the painting entirely. No explanation was given. To this day, texture artists note that the painting atlas still reserves space for void.png, a ghost in the game's files, waiting for someone to look too closely. Before daylight sensors gave clean redstone signals, they had a quirk, a barely perceptible fluctuation in their output. Most players never noticed. But redstone engineers quickly discovered that these tiny variations weren't random. They followed a pattern, one that aligned perfectly with the moon's phases. Clever builders used this to create lunar clocks, machines that could track not just day and night, but the exact phase of the moon. Some even claimed these clocks could predict eclipses, rare events when the sensor's signal would drop to zero for exactly 47 seconds. Despite the sky being bright as noon. When Mohan standardized the daylight sensor's behavior in 1.5, these fluctuations vanished. The lunar clocks fell silent. But in old worlds, if you know where to look, you can still find the ruins of these machines, their redstone dust arranged in strange, celestial patterns, their comparators pointing at the sky as if waiting for a sign that will never come. Before the end had cities, before it had ships, before it had a dragon at all, there was another version. In early beta builds, the end portal didn't lead to the floating islands we know today. Instead, it took players to a second overworld, an exact copy of their own, but empty. No mobs, no structures, just silence. And a bedrock floor where the void should have been. Some players who visited this place reported strange sensations, the feeling of being watched, the sound of footsteps that weren't their own. Others claimed to find single blocks misplaced, as if someone had been building there before them. The most persistent rumor, that if you stayed in this mirror world long enough, you would eventually see another player in the distance, a figure with your exact skin standing perfectly still. When you approached, they would disappear, and your game would crash. This version of the end was scrapped before official release. But somewhere buried in the code of those early builds, the mirror world still waits, patient, empty, and hungry for visitors. Between beta 1.2 and 1.4, placing wool blocks in specific patterns could cause nearby redstone to behave strangely, not randomly, not chaotically, but in ways that suggested an underlying logic, one that didn't match any known game mechanics. Players who experimented with these wool gates discovered something incredible. Certain arrangements of colored wool, particularly light blue and black, could perform calculations. They could store binary data. They could even, under the right conditions, execute simple programs. The most complex builds could play tic-tac-toe, could solve mazes, could, in theory, run entire computers if given enough space. Then, in 1.5, the block ID reorganization erased the effect entirely. The wool gates fell silent. Mohan never acknowledged the phenomenon, but to this day, A small group of theorists believe it wasn't a glitch at all, that the will code was an intentional Easter egg, a nod to the computational potential lurking beneath Minecraft's surface, and that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't entirely removed, just hidden deeper. Waiting. Before glowstone, before lanterns, before Soul 5, the Nether had another light source: amber blocks, cracked netherrack that pulsed with a faint, flickering glow. They generated rarely in small clusters near lava lakes, and breaking them yielded nothing but darkness. But their light had a unique property: it grew stronger during thunderstorms in the overworld. As if the Nether itself was reacting to the distant storms, resonating with their energy. When glowstone was introduced, amber blocks vanished entirely. No traces remained in the textures. No code lingered in the files, but players who remember them swear by an odd coincidence that the exact hue of their glow matches no other light source in the game, and that sometimes, very rarely, when lightning strikes near a nether portal, the netherrack inside flickers. Just for a second. As if remembering. Deep in Minecraft's code, there exists a particle effect known only as iconcrack_19, and like its siblings, it has no assigned item. No known trigger, just a faint, purple shimmer that appears very, very rarely when certain blocks are broken. Data miners have found references to it being tied to item.I in early test builds. Some believe it was meant for Ender-related mechanics. Others think it was a placeholder for the Dragon Egg's teleportation effect. For one snapshot, it accidentally appeared when Chorus Fruit teleported players a shower of violet sparks that made the end feel truly magical. Then it was gone again, but it's still there. Hidden. Waiting. And if you know where to look, you might just see it one last time. Everyone knows the far lands, that glitched world edge where terrain generation breaks into fractal madness, but few remember its acoustic twin. At exactly 1.5 times the far land's distance, sound began to distort. Mobs groaned in reverse, footsteps played too early, too late, as if the game itself was losing track of time. Most chilling of all were the phantom chunk noises, loading sounds that came from directions where no chunks existed. As if the world was still trying to generate, even past its own limits. When the far lands were fixed, their echo vanished too. But some players claim that if you take a long enough minecart ride toward the world border and turn your sound up just before you hit the invisible wall, you can still hear it. The sound of Minecraft trying to remember what it was supposed to be before villager trading was standardized. There existed a rare bug of villager that spawned with the robes of a librarian, but the face of a nitwit. These oracle villagers couldn't trade, couldn't sleep, just stood there, their emerald particles swirling in strange, intricate patterns. Players who watched them closely noticed something odd. The particles didn't move randomly. They formed shapes, numbers, symbols, even what looked like coordinates. The most persistent rumor that during thunderstorms, the patterns would align into a working seed, one that led to a stronghold with every end portal frame already activated. Mohang patched the bug. The oracle villagers disappeared, but on old servers, in worlds that have never been updated. They're still there. Watching. Waiting. Humming with the sound of a thunderstorm that never ends. In the earliest days of the Mesa biome's introduction, players began reporting a strange sight: a herd of golden horses galloping across the highest plateaus at dawn. Their coats shimmered in the sunrise. Their hoofs made no sound. And if a player approached, they would dissolve into the morning mist like a mirage. Some believed they were a glitch and used mob behavior bleeding into the game. Others thought they were intentional, a poetic touch meant to evoke wild mustangs roaming an untamed land. The most persistent rumor was that they were tied to a lost treasure buried somewhere in the mesa, waiting for a rider brave enough to chase them to their secret destination. But before anyone could solve the mystery, an update adjusted the biome's spawning mechanics. The golden horses never appeared again. Now, only the oldest mesa explorers remember them, and on quiet servers, when the sun rises over the copper cliffs. Some still swear they see a flicker of gold in the distance, just for a second, then gone. In the Ice Plains biome, Where the wind never stops howling and the snow falls in eternal silence, there was once a village unlike any other. Its houses stood half buried in snowdrifts. Its lanterns glowed despite having no one to light them. Its farms were perfectly preserved beneath layers of ice, crops frozen mid-harvest, and at its center, a well so deep that dropping a snowball into it yielded no sound of impact. No villagers lived there. No iron golems patrolled its streets, just empty beds, untouched workstations, and the overwhelming sense that something had gone terribly wrong. Some believed it was a glitch, a village that generated without its inhabitants. Others thought it was an intentional mystery, a ghost town meant to tell a story without words. The most unsettling theory, that the villagers had been there once, and something had taken them. When village mechanics were updated, the frozen village disappeared from world generation entirely. Now it exists only in the memories of those few players who wandered its silent streets and felt the weight of its emptiness. Before the warden lurked in the deep dark, strongholds held quieter. Stranger secrets, certain stone bricks, if you pressed your ear against them in just the right corner of a library, would emit the faintest echo, a zombie's groan, a distant lava bubble, a sound that shouldn't have been there. Players mapped which strongholds had these talking stones, trading seed numbers like treasure maps. Some swore the whispers formed words. Others claimed they changed based on the moon's phase. Then an update fixed the bug. The walls fell silent. But in untouched 1.7 worlds, if you sit very still in the blackness, you might still hear them. The last whispers fading away. Before phantom membranes dropped from the skies, there was a stranger ghost in the machine. Furnace minicarts would sometimes vanish from powered rails, leaving behind only their faint chugging sound. Players would follow the noise for chunks, only for it to stop abruptly. The vanished carts weren't in the entity list, couldn't be F3 found. Yet their echoes persisted until relogging. Some claimed they saw ghost trains moving on invisible tracks at world edges. Others insisted it was just audio lag. But on quiet multiplayer servers, when all other sounds slept, veterans would pause near abandoned rail lines. Listening. Before daylight sensors gave clean redstone signals, they sang, not literally, but their output fluctuated in tiny, rhythmic pulses, imperceptible to most, but perfect for those who knew how to listen. Redstone engineers built sundial clocks that tracked not just day and night, but moon phases and rare eclipse-like events. The most elaborate could predict thunderstorms hours in advance. Then Mohang standardized the sensor's behavior. The fluctuations vanished. The sundials fell silent. But in old worlds, if you know where to look, you can still find their remains. Dusty redstone arrangements pointing at the sky. Waiting for a song that will never play again. Buried in pre-1.16 code strings. References to biome_nether_crust suggest the nether was meant to have a fourth original biome. Unlike the hellish wastes, cells and valleys, or warped forests, this one allegedly featured sulfur pits and basalt pillars, terrain that later appeared fragmented across other biomes. The most intriguing clue, a single unused sound file named ambient.nether.crust.rumble that plays a low, tectonic shifting noise when hacked into the game. Some believe it was cut for being too similar to the overworld's caves. Others think it became the basis for the Deep Dark's vibration mechanics. Either way, the nether feels inexplicably incomplete to those who know. There should have been a fourth hell. Superflat's void preset hides an eerie anomaly. Dig down to the bedrock layer and place a note block. It plays a distorted version of the normal mode stretched 12% longer, with a faint echo. This only happens in void worlds. Only at exact y=0. Data miners found void worlds use a sound reverb calculation otherwise only applied in the end. Some believe this proves the superflat void was meant to be a pocket dimension. Others note that if you build a 3-block high pillar at world center and play the note block sequence from the credits, the echoes align perfectly with the main menu music's rhythm. Coincidence? Or is the void world humming along to a song we've forgotten how to hear? Early aquatic snapshots contained an unused music disc called submerged.og. 3 minutes of slowed down, waterlogged notes that would allegedly play in ruins when no player was nearby. Data miners found it was meant to trigger during thunderstorms. With the drowned humming fragments of its melody, the track was cut for being too atmospheric red, terrifying. But remnants linger in the sound files if you slow a trident's throw sound by 800%. You can hear the ghost of its chorus. Some say this explains why drowns still turn toward players silently, as if waiting for someone to remember the song they were meant to sing. For 3 snapshots in 1.4, there existed a painting titled Void. PNG, just for pixels of transparency that rendered as a blank canvas. When placed, it had a 1/1000th chance of showing its true form for a single frame. An eerie grayscale face some claimed resembled Notch's early avatar. The image was so fleeting most assumed they'd imagined it. The file was scrubbed from later releases, but texture pack makers noticed something on the original painting. PNG still reserves space for it, with its dimensions matching the mysterious Nether Reactor sprite from Pocket Edition. Was it a placeholder, an inside joke, or a ghost in the texture atlas, watching from between the pixels? Before the end had cities, ships, or even a dragon, there was another version. In early beta builds, the end portal led to a second overworld, an exact copy of your own, but empty. No mobs, no structures, just silence, and a bedrock floor where the void should have been. Players who visited reported strange sensations, the feeling of being watched, the sound of footsteps that weren't their own. Some found single blocks misplaced, as if someone had been building there before them. The most persistent rumor, that if you stayed long enough, you'd see another player in the distance, a figure with your exact skin standing perfectly still. When you approached, they would disappear, and your game would crash. This version of the end was scrapped before official release, but somewhere buried in old code. The mirror world still waits. Patient, empty, hungry. Between beta 1.2 and 1.4, placing little blocks in specific patterns could cause nearby redstone to behave strangely, not randomly, not chaotically, but in ways that suggested an underlying logic. Players discovered gates that could perform calculations, store binary data, execute simple programs. The most complex builds could play tic-tac-toe, solve mazes. In theory, run entire computers if given enough space. Then, in 1.5, the block ID reorganization erased the effect. The wool gates fell silent. Mohan never acknowledged it, but some believe it wasn't a glitch at all, that the wool code was an intentional Easter egg, a nod to the computational potential lurking beneath Minecraft's surface, and that maybe it wasn't entirely removed, just hidden deeper. Waiting. Before glowstone, before lanterns, before soul fire, the nether had ember blocks, cracked netherrack that pulsed with a faint, flickering glow. They generated rarely near lava lakes, and breaking them yielded nothing but darkness. But their light had a unique property: it grew stronger during overworld thunderstorms, as if the nether was resonating with distant storms. When glowstone was introduced, ember blocks vanished entirely. No traces remained. But players who remember them swear by an odd coincidence that the exact hue of their glow matches no other light source in the game, and that sometimes, very rarely, when lightning strikes near a nether portal, the netherrack inside flickers. Just for a second. As if remembering. Deep in Minecraft's code, there exists a particle effect known only as iconcrack_19. No assigned item, no known trigger. Just a faint, purple shimmer that appears very rarely when certain blocks are broken. Data miners found references to it being tied to item.I in early test builds. Some believe it was meant for ender-related mechanics. For one snapshot, it accidentally appeared when Chorus Fruit teleported players a shower of violet sparks that made the end feel magical. Then it was gone again. But it's still there. Hidden. Waiting. And if you know where to look, you might just see it. One last time. Everyone knows the far lands, that glitched world edge where terrain generation breaks into fractal madness. But few remember its acoustic twin. At exactly 1.5 times the far land's distance, sound began to distort. Mobs groaned in reverse. Footsteps played too early, too late. Most chilling were the phantom chunk noises, loading sounds from directions where no chunks existed. As if the world was still trying to generate past its own limits. When the far lands were fixed, their echo vanished too. But some players claim that if you take a long enough minicart ride toward the world border and turn your sound up just before you hit the invisible wall, you can still hear it. The sound of Minecraft trying to remember what it was supposed to be before villager trading was standardized. There existed a rare buggo villager with the robes of a librarian, but the face of a nitwit. These oracle villagers couldn't trade, couldn't sleep. Just stood there, their emerald particles swirling in strange, intricate patterns. Players noticed the particles formed shapes, numbers, symbols, even what looked like coordinates. The most persistent rumor that during thunderstorms, the patterns would align into a working seed, one that led to a stronghold with every end portal frame already activated. Mohang patched the bug. The oracle villagers disappeared, but on old servers. In worlds that have never been updated, there's still their .watching, .waiting, .deep in Minecraft's sound files lies an unused track labeled cave18.ah, the slow, echoing melody of water droplets and distant wind chimes that was meant to play in the deepest caverns. Unlike the current ominous drones, this was almost comforting. Testers reported it made them feel safe underground, like the caves were singing them to sleep. It was cut for being too peaceful compared to the intended spooky atmosphere. But remnants linger in the way certain cave sounds still harmonize if you stand in just the right spot. Some players have recreated it note for note using note blocks placed at specific Y levels, proving the song still exists in the game's DNA, waiting to be heard again. Buried in Pre-1. 7 code exists references to biome_skylands, floating islands with upside-down trees, and waterfalls that poured into the void. Unlike the ends barren chunks, these were meant to generate in the overworld at world edges, with their own unique grass color #8AAC38, a blue. Green hue not used elsewhere. The biome was fully functional in early tests, but caused severe performance issues when players flew near world borders. What remains are 3 things: the telltale grass color that very rarely appears in swamp biomes as a glitch, the sky prefix later used for end cities, and the persistent myth among old players that if you build high enough, you'll find islands that shouldn't exist. The truth, they almost did. Before the aquatic update, bats had a hidden behavior. Their squeaks weren't random. By recording their frequencies and mapping them to musical notes, data miners discovered they followed the pentatonic scale. Even stranger, bats near strongholds would occasionally mimic the exact rhythm of nearby silverfish stone cracks. This wasn't just ambient noise, it was a fully programmed echolocation language that was meant to help players find caves. The system was scrapped when Mohang realized it made bats too useful, conflicting with their purpose as purely atmospheric mobs. But the code remains. Which is why bats near Deep Slate still tilt their heads like they're listening to something ... And why their modern sounds align perfectly with the Warden's shriek frequencies. Early prototypes had a 72-minute day-night cycle instead of 20 minutes, with 12 distinct phases including false dawn and astronomical twilight. This complex system tracked the sun's actual position using celestial math, causing shadows to stretch differently in each biome. The most beautiful feature, during Blue Hour, the 4-minute window between sunset and night, redstone signals gained +2 blocks of range as the world cooled. This was removed for being too subtle, but traces survive. The sun still uses the old positioning math, which is why shadows don't perfectly align with blocks. And observers detect block updates 0.1 seconds faster at dusk, a ghost of the expanded redstone range that once was. Between beta 1.3 and 1.5, placing certain blocks adjacent to note blocks would change their timbre. Cobblestone created echo effects. Glass produced harmonics. And will added reverb. This wasn't just sound design. It was a physics system where blocks actually vibrated at different frequencies. The most powerful combo? A diamond block surrounded by lapis would produce a chord so pure it caused nearby passive mobs to gather in circles. The feature was axed for causing lag in large builds, but its legacy lives on. Modern note blocks still check for wool when calculating reverb, and the jump boost particle effect uses the same vibration algorithm that once made blocks sing. Some say if you arrange 16 note blocks in a spiral around a diamond block in an old version, you can still hear the lost chord ... For exactly 17 seconds before the game crashed. In early versions of flower forest biomes, there existed a rare weather variant called petal fall where pink and white particles resembling cherry blossoms would drift down during rain. Unlike normal rain that darkened the world, this weather event actually brightened the biome slightly and caused bees to become more active. The phenomenon was tied to specific moon phases and only occurred in about 1% of rainstorms. Players who witnessed it described an almost magical atmosphere, with the pastel-colored particles collecting on the ground like snow before vanishing at dawn. This feature was quietly removed when the weather system was overhauled, though keen observers note that flower forest bees still become agitated during rainstorms, a leftover behavior from when they would dance among the falling petals. Before the cave update, Extreme Hills biomes hid a terrifying secret: invisible caves. Due to a quirk in terrain generation, some cavern systems would generate with air blocks but no stone walls, creating vast, unseen hollows beneath the mountains. Players would suddenly fall through what appeared to be solid ground into yawning voids, their screams echoing through these phantom chambers. The most disturbing aspect was that these caves still spawned ores and mobs. You could hear zombies groaning from inside solid rock and see diamond veins floating in midair. While these were technically glitches, many players became convinced they were intentional hidden challenge areas. The caves were fixed when world generation was rewritten, though veteran miners still approach Extreme Hills with caution, half expecting the ground to swallow them whole. Early villager prototypes had a complex language system called Hestificate consisting of over 200 unique vocalizations, unlike modern villagers who simply hum. These original NPCs could convey specific information through different grunt patterns. Rising tones meant danger, staccato bursts indicated trading interest, and a distinctive 3-note call signaled the discovery of a nearby structure. Data miners found these sounds were actually encoding information. The length of a grunt corresponded to distance, while pitch indicated direction. Some players learned to interpret these calls well enough to navigate to villages and strongholds without maps. The system was simplified because testers found it too stressful to decode. Though remnants survive in how librarian villagers still use a specific two-tone call when near bookshelves, the ghost of their once complex communication system. Silverfish harbor one of Minecraft's darkest secrets. They remember in early versions, silverfish that escaped from monster eggs would retain memory of what block they hatched from and attempt to return to it. If that block type was nearby, they would burrow back in and regenerate the monster egg. Even more disturbing, silverfish could recognize players who had destroyed their nests and would prioritize attacking them over others. This advanced AI was scaled back for performance reasons, but the legacy remains. Silverfish still exhibit unusual pathfinding behaviors around certain stone types, and their attack patterns change slightly if they emerge from a block the player recently mined. Some veteran diggers swear that if you listen closely to a silverfish's skittering, you can hear a distorted version of the block-breaking sound from the version they were born in. An oral fossil of their origins. Before the current simple lunar phases, Minecraft's moon had real gravitational effects. In early beta, the moon's position actually affected gameplay in subtle ways. Items despawned faster during new moons, crops grew slightly slower during full moons, and most eerily, water flowed 1% further during moonrise. The most significant effect was on mob spawns. Certain rare mob variants like pale creepers with white explosion particles would only appear when the moon was at specific altitudes. This system was scrapped for being too complex. But artifacts remain. The moon's texture still has 8 distinct phases instead of 4, and spiders still spawn with slightly higher frequency during full moons, a holdover from when lunar gravity pulled more mobs from the darkness. Some veteran players still build their farms according to the old lunar calendar, convinced, perhaps rightly, that the moon remembers its former power deep within stronghold libraries, observant players may notice an eerie phenomenon. Bookshelves occasionally emit faint page turning sounds when no one is nearby. This is no glitch, but rather the last remnant of an abandoned living library concept. Originally, these bookshelves were meant to gradually reorganize themselves, with enchanted books physically moving between shelves to create new combinations. The most unsettling detail, some of the shuffled books would contain real, readable lore snippets about the builder's disappearance. Though the self-organizing mechanic was removed for being too resource-intensive, the whispering pages remain as a ghostly echo. Players who spend nights in these libraries report hearing the whispers form words in reverse audio when played backwards. They clearly say "look down" in multiple languages. A curious generation glitch in early versions caused some desert temple doors to spawn as half-blocks, visually present but non-functional. What makes this truly strange is that these phantom doors would sometimes briefly become solid during thunderstorms, allowing access to hidden chambers containing a single chest with peculiar contents, always exactly one string, one redstone dust, and one written book titled The Other Temple. No two books had the same text, but each contained coordinates leading to another desert temple, one that didn't exist in that world. Some theorized this was a scrap temple network system, while others believed it to be an elaborate AUG. The feature was removed when temple generation was standardized, though players still occasionally find desert temples with suspiciously misaligned door frames, silent witnesses to the phantom passages that once were. Buried in the fishing loot tables exists evidence of items that were never officially implemented. Players who data mine version histories can find references to broken sword and soggy page items that had a 0.001% chance to appear. These weren't placeholders. They had full textures and functionalities. The broken sword could be repaired into a weapon with random, unstable enchantments that changed daily, while soggy pages could be dried to reveal fragments of a lost Ocean King lore. Most disturbing was their shared trait. Both items would occasionally vanish from inventories, only to reappear days later in the same fishing spot they were originally caught. This was tied to an abandoned cursed loot system that made certain items remember their origin point, though removed for being too unpredictable. Echoes remain even today. Some players report catching the exact same named fish multiple times, as if the game refuses to let certain things be permanently claimed. Long before the end was conceived, Notch experimented with a sky dimension accessible through a nether portal frame built entirely from glowstone. Internal builds reveal this was more than just creative mode with clouds. It featured floating islands with unique gravity physics where you could fall upward into other landmasses. The dimension's most striking feature was its breathing blocks that slowly expanded and contracted, making structures appear alive. This was scrapped due to motion sickness complaints, but its DNA persists in multiple features. Shulker's levitation effect uses modified sky dimension gravity code. Phantom flight mechanics derive from the original upward falling implementation, and the Ender Dragon's AI was originally designed for a sky dimension boss called the Cloud Serpent. Some modders have reconstructed this lost dimension from leftover code fragments, revealing it to be far more complete than Mohang ever acknowledged, with fully functional biomes, to unused mob types, and even a crafting station for sky metal that suspiciously resembles netherite. Jungle temples hide one of Minecraft's most subtle and chilling secrets. In certain versions, item frames placed in specific positions within temples would occasionally display items that weren't placed there, most commonly rotten flesh or suspicious stew with identical NBT data. These ghost items couldn't be interacted with and would disappear when the chunk reloaded. Data miners discovered this was tied to an abandoned temple curse system where traps would remember what items triggered them. Even stranger, these phantom items always faced the same direction, toward the nearest undiscovered temple. Some players used this as an unintended navigation aid until Mohang fixed it. But in older worlds, if you find a jungle temple with an oddly placed empty item frame, try placing a map in it at midnight. Some claim it will still briefly display the ghost items, pointing the way to forgotten treasures. Early Minecraft prototypes included a dynamic season system that cycled every 16 real-world hours. Winter froze rivers and turned grass blocks pale. Autumn colored leaves red and orange, while summer made crops grow 15% faster. The most complex aspect was how seasons affected mobs. Zombies wore snow coats in winter, spiders spun web nests in autumn, and villagers held festivals during summer solstice. This system was fully functional but removed for being too demanding on older computers. The evidence remains everywhere. The unused snowy grass block texture still exists in the files. The Lager banner pattern clearly depicts a summer sun symbol, and the Wandering Trader's schedule still follows the old seasonal cycle. They appear most frequently during what would have been spring. Some resource packs restore this system, revealing how close we came to a Minecraft that lived and breathed with real seasonal rhythms, before villagers had professions. They had a complex friendship system where performing favors like giving food or defeating zombies near them would build relationship levels. At maximum friendship, villagers would gift unique items including family heirlooms, tools with randomized names and durability that couldn't be crafted. The system was surprisingly deep. Villagers remembered who saved them during raids, would gossip about players to other villagers, and could even develop rivalries. This was scrapped for being too complex, but remnants linger. Villagers still share bread during thunderstorms, a leftover friendship behavior. Iron golems still spawn more frequently around players who help villages using the old friendship calculations. And the hero of the village effect is actually a simplified version of the highest friendship tier. The most haunting remnant, baby villagers will sometimes pick up and hold items that match what their parents would have gifted, a behavior with no current purpose. But that made perfect sense in the old system. Deep in the code exists references to Untidy Shadow, a plant mob that would spawn in late levels between 5 and 7, appearing as a darker version of whatever mob it was mimicking. These shadows weren't hostile, but would absorb nearby light sources when players weren't looking directly at them. The concept was fully modeled and animated before being cut for being too frustrating. However, parts of its code were repurposed. Phantoms use the shadow's light-seeking behavior. The Warden's darkness mechanics derive from its light absorption ability. And the advancement for sleeping uses the shadow's detection system. Some players claim to have encountered glitch shadows in old versions, mobs that appear slightly darker than normal and cause torches to flicker when they pass. These are likely just rendering errors, unless they're the last echoes of a mob that was supposed to make us afraid of the twilight. Minecraft almost had underground weather. Early cave systems were meant to feature mineral storms where falling stalactites created hazards, gem wines that scattered items, and deep fog that limited vision but revealed ore veins. The most developed was crystal rain in geodes, sparkling particles that temporarily made amethyst emit redstone signals. This system was abandoned when cave generation proved too unpredictable, but evidence remains. The Spelk sensor's vibration detection uses repurposed deep fog code. Lightning can still rarely strike underground, a holdover from when storms affected all light levels. And the dripstone leaks water during rain feature was originally part of a larger cave weather interaction. Some resource packs restore these effects, revealing how alive the underground was meant to feel, not just a static maze of tunnels, but a dynamic environment with its own meteorological rules. One of Minecraft's most ambitious scrapped systems was block aging, where placed blocks would gradually weather over time. Wood would develop cracks and moss. Stone bricks would crumble at the edges, and metals would oxidize. This wasn't just visual. Aged blocks had different properties. Weathered would burn longer. Cracked stone bricks transmitted redstone signals weakly, and oxidized iron conducted lightning. The system was nearly complete before being cut for performance reasons. Its legacy lives on in several features. Copper oxidation is a simplified version of the original system. The mossy block variants were meant to be natural aging outcomes, and suspicious sand, gravel used the aging code's phase change mechanics. Some modders have reconstructed the full system from leftover code, revealing that even dirt was meant to gradually become coarse dirt in dry biomes, while jungle grass would slowly spread decorative vines. What might have been the most immersive building system instead survives only in fragments, though players who pay attention may notice that certain blocks still behave slightly differently when placed in specific biomes. A ghost of the aging system that almost was.